All right, so we are all aware that the NBA All-Star Game is a complete mess. I mean, really, what is this? This is just... ugh. But before we decide how we fix the All-Star Game, we gotta really look at what the problem is, right? That's the first thing. You gotta accept that you have a problem. The NBA All-Star Game has a problem. The problem is, nobody cares. I mean, the players don't care. They probably prefer not to actually play in the game, and I don't blame them. I mean, what we asked them to do all week during the All-Star break, it's a lot for these players that are really the cream of the crop in the NBA, and by the time they get to that NBA Sunday, they're exhausted. Not to mention the risk of running through injuries, aggravating an injury that you might have had a couple of weeks earlier. Just that doesn't really make sense with the amount of money that people are making these days. The coaches and front offices don't want their players in the game either. I mean, Mike Malone was a coach in this game, and he even said afterwards that he took out Nikola Jokic because he didn't want him getting a ton of minutes in this game.
His health is more important than playing a few more minutes in an All-Star game. Thinking very big picture here, but...
And this is probably good, right? This is coaches and front offices putting their team success over a meaningless expedition game in the middle of the season. And year after year, the NBA fans have also decided that they don't care. This year's All-Star Game was actually the worst rated NBA All-Star Game in the history, with only 4.6 million people watching, the lowest that it's ever had before. That's even a 22% drop from viewership from 2021. Which was the second worst viewed. Here's a graph dating back from 1990 to now. You can clearly see the ratings declining sharply. The highest rated game being 22 million people watching it. So how do we fix it? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's money. Hey, before we continue, I want to tell you about today's sponsor. It's me. I have a Patreon. I go into a lot of behind the scenes stuff. There's a Patreon only podcast that I put on each week. Really just try to create a cool community there. So if you want to join my Patreon, the link's down below in the description, and come join us. All right, back to the video. I was really thinking about this, and would it be crazy to think that the winning players get $700,000 to $1 million each if they win the game? I mean, I know that these players are making a lot of money, but if you can make $1 million in a day, that adds a little extra juice to this game. I mean, it does kind of feel like that's enough money where these players wouldn't just phone it in. And look, I understand that there are some logistical questions that would bring. You know, where would this money come from? And my pushback on that is that the NBA, if they really want the NBA All-Star Game to work, they'll find that money.
Figure it out.
And I would even be for shortening the All-Star Game rosters. And so you didn't have to give it to 12 people, maybe you gave it to 10 people. I mean, you can figure out how to maybe have $10 million left over for that game so that you can give out to those 10 players. But if you can find this money and you can get ratings up and you can get viewership up and you can show your advertisers and your sponsors that this is an event worth monetizing, I think that the money will come eventually. I know that they've done the charity thing. It hasn't worked because no matter what, if they're phoning it in and they don't play defense, the charity still gets the money. In this scenario, the players are getting the money. And yeah, it's either all or nothing.
Seems a little selfish.
If you limited the rosters to 10, I think that it would entice some of these players who really want to become all-stars. You might have to change the voting structure of it, but I do think that there is a possibility that now you have more players wanting to be involved in the All-Star weekend because in one night they can make X amount of money. And why not still have the draft? I wouldn't have a Post Malone concert right after the draft. I would try to have this pretty quick. I would even have it where they're already on the floor ready to go after warm-ups, and it really is kind of like backyard or pickup basketball. I think that would be really cool. We've seen the NFL pivot from an actual game where this was kind of the same problem that the NFL had. They pivoted to the flag football game, and while it wasn't maybe the best to watch as an adult, I know a ton of kids that really enjoyed watching the flag football because they see their stars, they see their faces, they see these people, and they're out there having fun. And that's a big part of it. They're still competing, but they're having fun. You know, you could do that route maybe at the NBA. You could try to figure out more of a gimmicky way to go about this. I know that there's been rumors that maybe a one-on-one tournament, but I don't think players are really going to be that invested in that. And I've also seen people say that you could adopt Major League Baseball's all-star format. And I don't really love that. I know that the MLB all-star game is actually the most viewed all-star game of the three major sports, but it feels kind of weird to have home field advantage in the NBA Finals attached to the All-Star game, especially now that we've gone away from East and West. You'd have to go back to that, and it just feels kind of weird. I've never really loved that about the MLB All-Star game, is that somebody who doesn't have any stake in it, the team might not make the playoffs, they can decide whether or not the best team in the league is hosting the World Series and has home field advantage. It feels kind of weird. So a lot's going to have to change with the NBA All-Star game, but how I would fix it is really incentivize these players. Give them $700,000 or $1 million each if they are on the winning roster. I think that entices players enough to want to play and be competitive. And you can shorten the game so that maybe these players aren't playing as long, right? Maybe that's how you kind of avoid injury, is try to shorten the length of the game. But when it comes down to it, what you're going to have to do is incentivize the players with money. That's it. I think you could also maybe move the All-Star game to the end of the year, kind of like the NFL, where if your team's not playing in the NBA Finals, then you can play in this. Maybe that will entice some more defense and more competitive nature. They might just cancel it in the next couple of years. But if the NBA really wants to have an all-star festivities and really just have an all-star game specifically, they're going to have to do something about this, because this year's all-star game was abysmal. And I turned it off after about 2 minutes. Wasn't fun to watch.